brought up. Three particular things that we will talk about and we'll point out today is one, a little sermon-like, be conscious of how you treat people, be conscious how you receive from people, and then also be conscious how you walk or conduct or orchestrate your everyday life. So, three quick points that we'll talk about today amongst the other precepts that are in Colossians 3, verses 12 through 17. We're going to read out of the New King James Version and the New Living Translation today before we start. I believe Joe has got the New King James Version brought up first. So, just verses 12 through 17. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering. Verses 13. Bearing with one another and forgiving one another, if anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. Verses 15. But above all things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. Verse 15. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which also you were called in one body, and be thankful. Verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. And verse 17, and whatever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. Now, if we read this same text out of the New Living Translation, it is basically, in essence, the same. It just does a little more translation with the Greek word. I was telling the guys in the back, I said, when I read the New Living Translation, I still think in context of the King James Version because that's what I've studied most of my life in, the New King James and the King James, and I still think of that context, and then when I look at the original Greek word and I look at the definitions, I see that's why the New Living Translation sometimes picks the words that it picks. So, since God chose you, when we look up the Greek word there, that's what elect, the King James, New King James uses elect, but when we look at the original word, it in essence means God chose you. The word means chose. So, since God chose you to be holy people that He loves, He must clothe yourself, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Verse 13, make allowance for each other's faults, and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. Verse 15, and let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts, for as members of one body you are called to live in peace, and always be thankful. Verse 16, let the message about Christ in all its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other with all the wisdom He gives. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. And verse 17, and whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through Him to God the Father. I really love the New Living Translation and how it really takes the King James, the New King James, just to a little bit another level. Now, when I say another level, it means basically when I take it apart in the King James and go back to the original Greek, it sounds just like the New Living Translation. So, starting back with those first verses in verse 12, he says, since God chose you, or you're God's elect, be the holy people. Chose you to be holy people. He chose you, He picked you to be the holy people that He loves. So since God chose you to be holy people, He loves, you must clothe yourself. Now, if you remember throughout Colossians chapter 3, he's talking about a lot about taking out, putting on the old man, taking off the old clothes and putting on the old clothes. Don't be the old man, but be the new man. Be not the old person that you used to be, but be the new person that you're supposed to be, as he's instructing the church here. So he instructs, make sure that you understand that you are the chosen Christian. When this means that God has chosen the Christian and chosen him to be something special. He's chosen you to be something special in His plan. Elect, a lot of times, is a word that frightens a lot of people. When we look at the word in the King James New King, the elect, you're the elect. It frightens people a lot of times, but in essence, you are chosen. You're chosen to be something special in His plan, and we need to remember that. No matter what you're going through today, you're still chosen by God to do something special. Matter of fact, you may be going through some of the things you're going through for a divine opportunity to succeed in that plan or step into the plan that God's got for you. So that elect, it frightens some, but it should be taken as comfort. It should comfort us that He's chosen us, and as that our destiny will be fulfilled in Him. He says, put on. So we see a responsibility here that we must clothe ourselves. We must put on. The KJV or the New KJV says put on, and the New Living Translation says you must clothe yourself. You must put on these things. We get the Ephesian feel about putting on the armor of God. We get that same feel that we get from the Apostle Paul here. Put on. Take some interest to put on. Understand that you have a part of responsibility and that you have a certain ability to control the things that live inside of you. I think that's what we need to be conscious of, and that's why I think about the first thing that we need to be conscious of is how we treat people. You have that power of how you treat people. You can treat me bad or you can treat me good today. And likewise, I can reciprocate whether I treat you bad or whether I treat you good. It's not something that just happens. I get caught up with people that just say, oh, this just happens. It just happens. That's a cheap excuse for you not having any power. Well, I spent all my money. You know why? Because you chose to spend all your money. You should take power over your money. Don't let your money rule you. Don't let your emotions rule you. Take power over your emotions. Take power over what you're doing and how you conduct yourself. And you know, we've had this discussion all on up because Colossians chapter 3 is kind of leading on this. Put these things off of you. Now he's saying put these things on. So we see that we need to put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. If we look at every one of these qualities, he didn't say put on industrialism. Don't put on he didn't say put on creativity, did he? He said put on tender mercy, put on kindness, put on humility. If we start really looking at what these are, they all deal with a way that we express ourselves in relationships. It's a significant measure in a Christian life how you treat your relationships. How we treat people and the quality of our relationships are very important, the writer says here. Be conscious how you treat people. It'll show the rest of the world what you really are. It really will. So today, after church, when you go to the restaurant and you get upset because you're having to wait too long for your food, remember that. It happened to me last night. I had kind of not looked at the lesson for a couple of days, and last night I had a great opportunity to not have patience. We were at a restaurant, and some things we didn't have any silverware is what it was, and the waitress kept just running off. I couldn't even tell her we needed some silverware. We needed something to eat with. We already had some food there, but you couldn't do anything with it, and I was beginning to lose patience. And Melissa could see I was getting upset, and I was making some physical motions, and my body language was saying I'm fixing to get really real with somebody about what's going on here. And we had just had a conversation about patience, I think. And I think it was in one of those issues where I was saying, Melissa, you need to pray for patience. Melissa, you need to have patience. So it gave her a great opportunity just to preach that word right back to me. Tom, what about that patience you was telling me about? What about that patience that you said that I needed to have? Where is your patience right now? I guess the point is I had a real good opportunity to lose my mind and treat somebody in a poor way when it really, in the great scope of life, was meaningless. You say, well, it's a big deal if you're paying. Listen, money is money. It's going to fly away. Right? I know I sit down for a meal and I'm paying for a meal and I expect a certain amount of service and I'm going to pay that waitress and I'm going to give her a good tip if she gives me good service. I understand all that. But in this great scope of the things, I looked at her a couple times and Melissa really, she allowed God to use her, I guess. She probably didn't know. She's probably just doing what my wife usually does and just being a good wife. But, God was really using her in ministry. I don't know if she was aware of it. But I was thinking, when I looked at my waitress, you could tell. Didn't look like she had the easiest life. I could tell just around her eyes, it looked like she'd probably been either working an extra job or she'd been up or maybe she'd been conducting or had a lifestyle that just wasn't the easiest lifestyle. And I began to think, this may not even be her fault. And it wasn't her fault. It's actually the hostess that should give you the silverware in this place that we were at. And I realized that, but I didn't just go off because I thought, what happens if I treat her poorly? And what kind of example is that to her of me being a Christian? And then the second thing is, how can I impact her life today if I treat her poorly because I don't have any stinking silverware to eat with? I mean, there was years ago where we didn't even have silverware, right? My gosh, that's right. I got 10 fingers. We can go back in time if we need to. But I thought, listen, is it worth me destroying my witness and my testimony today because I got to wait a little longer on silverware? It's not. You've got to be conscious how you treat people. You can talk to anybody today on a Sunday morning that's going to be a waitress somewhere, and they'll tell you the hardest, the most aggravating day to work is on Sunday after church because church folks are rude. They're rude. And I don't know what it is. I don't know why we're not conscious of it, but it's the truth. And we need to be conscious. You got a great opportunity probably sometime today on the day that you pick to worship to really minister to somebody at a restaurant, at somewhere else that you're going to be, and we got to be conscious of how we treat people. That's what he said. You need to put on these clothes. So you've took off these old dirty clothes, these clothes of sin, these clothes that are no longer your identity. When your identity changes, guess what? Everything changes. When your inside changes, it cannot do anything but affect your outside. Do you believe that? Just find you a newborn Christian. Find you somebody that has just accepted Jesus in their life, and you just look in about a week how different they look on the outside because the inside's changed. You give them a month. If they've got the real deal, you give them a month, and you won't even hardly recognize them in about 4 weeks on how the outside has totally changed because the inside has changed. They won't wear the same clothes. They won't conduct themselves the same way. And in all honesty, there's a lot of ministry that will have to be done because guess what the enemy does? They may be certain things on their body. They may be certain things that they've done. They piercings, tattoos. And the devil will start attacking them because of those things. He'll utterly attack them, and there'll be times for ministry that they'll have to understand that, whatever's happened in your past now is just for God to minister through. So use that for ministry. Anything that the devil's telling you is bad, God can use for good. So be conscious how you treat people. Tender mercies. If something is tender, it's sensitive, right? If you have a tender muscle, that means that muscle is sensitive to touch, isn't it? It's very sensitive. So if it says put on tender mercies, if something's tender, it's sensitive to touch. The apostle, Adam Clark said the apostle would have you to feel the slightest touch of another individual's misery. And as their clothes are put over their body, so their tenderness feeling should be always within reach of the miserable. That it should affect us when somebody else is in pain. That we should be merciful because somebody else is going through a hard time. See, we can get really, really caught up in our goals and our aspirations, and Christianity can be just a step-by-step plan for you to achieve your selfish goals. And never be observant or conscious of everybody else in the world with you. Listen, Christianity is a roadmap to success. There is no doubt about it. God's got all kinds of success for you, but Christianity is not all about you either. A lot of it's about you, but not all of it's about you. We need to find balance. Put on kindness. Put on tender-hearted mercy. Put on kindness. The defined word in the Greek is Christos, as virtue of the person whose neighbor's good is as dear to him or her as their own. That you care about somebody else's success as you do your own success. That you want others to be blessed as you're blessed. That you care to the level, because there's a lot of folks out there, as long as I got my blessing, I want you to have your blessing. But if I'm not got my blessing, then I really don't give a rip if you got yours or not. You know, in all essence, that's not really being a servant, is it? A servant says, let me take care of you, and then everything else will be took care of for me later. Put on kindness. I read one thing, one person said it's used of wine that's grown mellow. Wine that's grown mellow with age, and it's lost its harshness. It is the word used when Jesus said, my yoke is easy. Kindness. Put on kindness. I think, kindness is getting a lot less rigid, mellowing out a little bit to the point where you can be friendly and that you can show others kindness and you can want the best for not only you but other people. People outside your family. People outside your lane. Humility, he says. Kindness, humility. We can say that humility is the parent of both meekness and long-suffering. Meekness shows how humility will affect my actions toward others. Meekness will not dominate. Meekness will not manipulate. It will not coerce for my better ends. What is meekness? Is being very teachable, not really high-minded. Long-suffering shows how humility will affect my reaction toward others. I will not become impatient. I'll not become short. I'll not be filled with resentment toward the weaknesses and the sins of others. See, that's interesting too when you look at it along that lines of having long-suffering, having humility, having gentleness, having patience, that somebody else's weaknesses and sins are not going to cause me to resent them. And then in the next verse, I believe he says, forgiving, making an allowance for each other's faults, and forgive anyone who offends you, because remember, the Lord forgave you. Basically, kind of that prominent rule, hey, you've been forgiven, so you should forgive it. And we know all other scriptures that we can tie in with this. How can you forgive, how can you love God, whom you've not seen, if you can't love your brother? And how could you love somebody if you can't forgive them? Forgiving one another. Hard to do. If you've got a complaint against another, we need to forgive them even as Christ forgave us. We're told to live forgiving one another after the pattern. How do we forgive one another? After the pattern. The pattern has been set. After the pattern of Jesus and how he forgave us. I want to tell you, when you sin, even though it grotesques God, he doesn't send a lightning bolt down from heaven instantaneously to strike you dead, does he? It's because he loves you. And he's waiting to forgive you. But some of us, as soon as we get offended, forgiveness is way away from us. But if we're conscious of forgiveness, if we get offended, maybe we have an anticipation of not wrath, but an anticipation of forgiveness. So be conscious how you receive people. We talked about be conscious how you treat people, but be prepared and conscious how you receive people. See, I am a real firm believer that the only way that you can offend me is if I let you offend me. The only way you're going to hurt me is if I let you hurt me. Now, that can be counterproductive because the first defense mechanism against what I said is you don't let anybody in. And then you never show kindness, you never show friendliness, you never really show that much love because you've always got this wall built up, right? Because if you let people in, what happens? If you let people into your circle, into your bubble, into your atmosphere, then you have the risk at being hurt. But yet, we need to be conscious, and what does it say? Make an allowance. Make a portion for somebody's fault. Understand that people are people. Your best friend is a person. Your spouse is a person. People you go to church with are people. And they're not always going to be perfect. And it's just a matter of time. If you hang around somebody long enough, they're going to offend you. Anybody ever have any brothers or sisters? How many times you get in a fight with your brother and sister? And you know, I talk about my daughters all the time. There's one prominent thing that I echo constantly no matter what. That when all your friends are gone, you're going to have friends come and go all your life. And depending on where you're at in life, you'll probably have a different group of friends because normally your friends are people that you're interacting with every day, that you're kind of walking life with every day. But I tell you one thing, when there's some things, friends are going to come and go, but there's one thing that you're always going to have. You'll have your sisters. Your sisters will always be your sisters. No matter where you're at in life, no matter what state you're living in, they'll still be your sisters. Here's what I'm kind of getting at. When you're around somebody long enough, they're probably going to offend you just like brothers and sisters fight. We need to get over it. Just like they get over it. Like I've heard all kinds of bickering this morning, like I do every Sunday morning, amongst sisters. But you know what? They go ride in the same vehicle to the restaurant after church together. And you'll be surprised how they'll get along for a minute or 30 minutes, and then the next minute they're going to be upset with each other. But you know what? They get over it because they're sisters. They're brothers and sisters. They're family. They make an allowance for each other's faults. And I'm under this idea that, you know what? My Christian folks and family, they probably going to do something to offend me, and I just need to get over it. Because there's probably been a great opportunity for me to get offended at you, and there's probably been a greater opportunity for you to get offended at me. By something I said, by a misunderstanding, by the way I look, or by the way you look. And you know what? If I make an allowance, you know, they are who they are. Right? I make an allowance and say, you know what, I'm not going to let them get offended. I'm not going to be offended of that. Because some of you are just blunt. And you have no filter. And you say things before you think about what you're saying. And sometimes that's all right because I know you. And I'm like, you know, that's just Mom. That's just Melissa. I'm going to use them because they're safe zones for me right now. You know, if Ricky was here, I'd use him, but he's not. That's just Charles. I'll use Charles. It's just Charles. You know, that's what he talks to me. You know, and we have to forgive anyone who offends us. Listen, there's sometimes that I am offended, and my first reaction, because of my mentality, is to make allowance. When you hit the right spot, I go into kill mode. Does that make sense? Destroy mode. You hurt me, I'm eye to eye, tooth to tooth. I get the eye of the tiger. You know, that's what I got out of Rocky. The eye of the tiger meant you went to the kill zone. It meant you went to this other phase where you seek and you destroy the opponent. The eye of the tiger, right? I don't know if that's what it meant. That's kind of what it meant to me. Because I'm telling you, when the music played, he took down that Russian. Mr. T didn't have a chance. I mean, that's the old ones. We ain't even talking about the new stuff. Make an allowance for each other's fault. Be conscious of how you receive people. People are going to say stuff all the time that you can be offended with. Right? You can get offended at a lot of things. You can make up stuff to get offended at. I can get offended every moment. You can too. It's if we don't want to live in the flesh, that's what's going to happen. But Paul says, put on clothes, put on these new layers of your identity, because that's what it kind of comes down to. This is a new identity. And because the inside has changed, the outside begins, we're going to put on clothes. I also want to mention here, because it becomes very apparent in a couple more verses, that he's just not talking on an individual basis, but if nothing else, he's talking about a whole community. He's talking about a whole corporate body to be like this. He's talking about, church, you need to get over being offended. You need to put on kindness, church. You need to put on humility, church. And you'll see that because he really addresses it when he talks about the peace. Be conscious of how you receive people. Understand how do we forgive? Well, how did Jesus forgive us? And how does God continue to forgive us? How does that work? Well, there's just attribute after attribute after attribute that happens when we do something wrong, and we think, well, I'm glad God don't operate like I do. I'm glad God doesn't operate like my flesh wants to operate. So you must, and I didn't spend a lot of time on this. He said, remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must. The word must is pretty strong. You must forgive others. Because if this is your identity, you must forgive others. You are going to be a miserable human being with your new identity if you can't find forgiveness for other people. I'm thankful that the new identity makes me miserable when I can't forgive somebody. It troubles the depths of my guts, of my soul, of my spirit, because it's not my identity to be unforgivable, like to unforgive, to not forgive. And I know you're sitting there and you're saying, but you hadn't been done like I've been done. You hadn't been abused like I've been abused. What I'm telling you, there's forgiveness in your new identity in Christ Jesus. No matter how harsh and how bad. And listen, I understand. There is things that had to work in me. There was, as much as I wanted to forgive somebody, certain people in my life, I wanted full forgiveness. It took time for God to continue. But here's the thing, the new identity, your new creation that you are in Christ Jesus, the second Adam, this salvation that you've received, even though it's hard, it's still something that you got to put on. I'm putting on forgiveness. Even though it's hard, I'm going to put it on. And my experience is the people that hurt me the most, that God said, you've got to get this out of your life because it's going to make you miserable. It took every day for me to say, I forgive them, I forgive them, I forgive them, I forgive them. And it took a consistent, conscious effort for it actually to be totally released in me. I wish everything was like a snap of the fingers, but the reality is everything's not. I can tell you just need to let it go, and that doesn't help you one bit. But I can tell you the reality of the situation, the people that cut me the deepest in my life, I knew I must forgive them, and I would try, and I would try, and I would give it to God, and I'd give it to God, and I'd just keep on giving it to God because I knew I had to do it. I didn't know how to do it. And when you do that, what happens is you crucify the flesh. You understand, my flesh doesn't want to forgive them, but my spirit, my new identity says this is what's got to happen in your life. And the flesh is warring against the spirit, but the Bible tells me that I can conquer the flesh through the spirit. So continually, every day when I get my spot where I'm walking in the spirit, I'm praying in the spirit, I'm telling God, I got to forgive them. You got to help me to forgive them every day till finally the spirit gets victory over the flesh, and I struggle no more with that. It's just, and that's kind of what I was getting at about forgiving people. You know, I say I forgive them, and I want to forgive them, but it's hard to forgive them. And it doesn't seem like I did forgive them. I read a thing that says forgiveness is never saying that I'll accept your apology and I forgive you, but I won't forget. That's cheap forgiveness. That's forgiveness that's not really forgiveness. That is hard to swallow for anybody, me included, because we'll get past this spot of how you've attacked me, offended me, hurt me, but I won't never forget it. I'll tell you this, and this is what, after verse 17, we get into kind of our marriage relationships. And Paul goes right into that, because the epitome of, if something happens between me and Melissa, my wife, for those that watch this video and don't know who Melissa is, my wife, and I say, you know what, I'll forgive you, but I can't forget this. It is going to damage our future relationship as long as I hold on to that. Now, the truth of the matter is, we can get past this spot, but there comes a point where we've got to forget that too. And the forgetting part is the hardest part.